This is the craziest thing. I'm in Crescent City and a fire someplace very nearby has creeped up. Look at this. This is nuts. It has progressively gotten worse as the day has gone on. There's actually particulate coming down. You can see the particulate falling on the windshield here. Look at that. That is crazy. That is just nuts. In fact, look at the sun. Crazy. Hey folks, Chris here. It has been, oh boy, a very long time since I've done a video. And I've been feeling kind of bad about that because I just sort of disappeared, not really explaining where it was that I went. Boy, this past 6 months has been really difficult. I kind of want to explain why I disappeared and where I went. As you can see, I'm not in the RV anymore. The past 6 months has been incredibly challenging for me and just a whole lot of people. During much of this past year, I had been camped out in Utah, not really having been able to travel a lot. It was really difficult for a lot of nomads. And one of the challenges for me is that, I'm used to going to a coffee shop and working. And when the world was sort of normal back in 2019, I would go to a town and find a place to park, and I would take my scooter off and I would explore, and then when I had work to do, I would go to a coffee shop, work there. I did that along the Oregon coast in 2019, worked on projects, and that works really well for me. And I got really good at finding places to park in cities and going there and then being able to do that as a routine and going to the gym. And then all that changed in 2020. Beginning of 2020, I had been in Southern California, and I got back into Utah just as things were shutting down, just when everything started to go haywire in the world. And so I ended up staying at the flight park up in the middle of Utah for months. And at the end of that, after having done a lot of work, because I also had a lot of work to do. I just had this huge project that was ongoing over the course of several years, and it got really intense. And that just really stressed me out because I'm not used to going to a coffee shop, not being held up in an RV, isolated. And I began to get really, really bad, like claustrophobia. And like every pain point that the RV had that I normally just lived with became worse and worse, and my stress levels got really bad. By the time August to September timeframe, I had finished up work, and I had a window of opportunity to do some more traveling. And so I picked up and went back up to Oregon. I had wanted to explore the southern Oregon coast. And in 2019, I explored the coast, but from about the midpoint up to the north. And it was spectacular. I mean, it was really amazing. And this time I was going to go to Northern California, Crescent City, and then move north from there. But of course, in 2020, there were crazy fires in Oregon and California, and Washington for that matter. It just seemed like the West Coast was on fire. And I thought I would get out to the coast itself and bypass the bulk of the fires, but it turned out that in fact the airflow patterns were somewhat odd, and they were going inland out to sea, and so all of that smoke was being pushed out to sea. Welcome to the Oregon coast in 2020. This is nuts. Look at the smoke from the wildfires here. I mean, this is the craziest thing. I've never seen anything quite like it. That beach should be just stunning and clear and beautiful, and it's not. Amazing. This smoke. I've stopped off at another place. Should be an absolutely spectacular view. And it just, everything kind of seems like an alien landscape here. Let me swing around. You can see the beach there. But yeah, it feels just like an alien landscape, like out of a sci-fi movie. So I had driven up into southern Idaho, my route through southern Idaho, and got to Twin Falls. And even here in Utah, there was a substantial amount of smoke that was being blown over from California and Oregon. And I really hoped it would improve as I got more to the coast. Southern Idaho was so smoky. I got to Twin Falls, and Twin Falls has this great rift in it that's quite a spectacular geological feature. And it just felt like I was on an alien planet there. So I took off and I went back over to Oregon. Took the same route that I had taken before through Boise, and I've always liked stopping at Boise. Boise's another of those towns that I know where to go and I know where to park and I know what to do there. Fortunately, southern Idaho was never super locked down. Idaho kind of had a more laid-back approach, and so it wasn't too difficult to be there. Into Oregon, went over to a little town called Burns, and then over into Bend. Bend was magical the first year in 2019 that I got there. Spectacular sunsets. I had wanted to go back up to Pilot Butte, which is a cinder cone in the middle of the city, and watch the sunsets again, but it was all closed down. The little downtown area of Bend was partially open. You were supposed to wear a mask everywhere. People were out and about, but there were signs everywhere saying there was a $1,200 fine for not wearing a mask. Check this out. I'm in Bend, and I'm down at the Deschutes River. This is an area that I didn't know about before, and I came down to just explore. This is the Deschutes River before it gets down into sort of that cute, more like a lake pond area. This is broken up into a couple of different sort of flows so that people can recreate on it in different ways. And in fact, they've engineered it so that they can change the flow. Let's go down and take a look at that. Navigating the fish ladder. Look at that.
Dude, that's why I was trying to tell kids. I was like, you guys need to fucking appoint somebody like now. Well, she has to be voted.
Very cool. So I didn't spend a lot of time there, and I took off and I went south on the way to Klamath Falls. Well, I just stopped. Boy, there is an algae bloom in the entire lake. Toxic algae, and you can see it right there. Somebody told me about that. Apparently this lake has a really bad problem with toxic algae bloom, and I can see it. It also smells really bad. It's kind of pretty out here, especially with all the smoke giving it all the depth. And then I got to Medford, stayed at Medford for just a day. There was a little bit of smoke, there was a little bit of atmospherics, but it wasn't too bad. And then left the next day, got to Crescent City, and found out that the day after I left, they had evacuated the entire town of Medford, Oregon, and several of the smaller communities south because fires had broken out and it was basically about to burn down to the ground. The route that I had taken, 199, had been closed. And so a lot of what I was doing driving through Oregon this time was through some degree or another of smoke. When I finally got out to Crescent City, there was a little bit of atmospherics, but it was pretty clear. And going out and photographing the coastline down there was beautiful. So I'm going down to the beach, going down to another beach here. Gonna come down and look at this. Oh, some people with fire there, and I can smell it. I woke up the next day and a massive fire had started in Northern California, massive apparently, and all of that got blown out to sea right over Crescent City. It was orange outside, and there was soot raining from the sky, and it was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. I was in Crescent City. I spent 4 or 5 days there. I found a great parking space. I didn't get bothered by the police. It seemed like a pretty chill place to kind of camp out and take my scooter. And but I decided that I wanted to hightail it and get moving north through the coast. But all of the coast was, again, like being on Mars. There were so many fires that were blowing out to sea in an odd airflow pattern. The normal, beautiful, exquisite Oregon coast was shrouded in drab smoke. And so all the picturesque features were gone. And it was dry, and everything just felt forlorn and depressing. There was COVID, and then there's, the forest fires. So I didn't spend much of any time exploring. I just hightailed it up to Florence, which is right in the middle of the Oregon coast, and then spent the night there. And it was actually fairly clear there, but I ended up chatting with a guy who was there who had been evacuated from a little town just north of there, half of which had burned down apparently. So I decided to go back over to Eugene, and Eugene had a massive fire that broke out. So the route going from Eugene over to Florence was beautiful. It was a really beautiful drive, but the smoke progressively was building and building and building as I got closer to Eugene. And by the time you got to Eugene was just shrouded in dense smoke. And as I moved further through it, it got worse and worse because this massive fire had just broken out just sort of east of it. I was watching a website that was listing route closures throughout the state. And half of the routes were closed in Oregon. There was literally only one route open and available to go from the coast to Central Oregon, and that was the one at Florence. Everything else was closed. Wow. And so I ended up getting over to Eugene, and I had thought about camping there, but the smoke was so bad that I just kept driving back to Bend. And there was one route that was open, and it was so smoke shrouded that there was nothing pretty to see. You literally couldn't see it. There were signs that says, hey, beautiful lake off to the side here, and you couldn't see it because the smoke was so dense. And so I got back to Bend, and Bend was smoke shrouded. So I ended up hightailing it out of Oregon. I found a place in an industrial park to camp for a night or two, but there was so much smoke there I didn't want to keep breathing that. So I made it back out to southern Idaho, where it was like emerging back into a normal world again. You had to wear a mask here and there, but they weren't crazy about it, right? And so I spent a little bit more time there. It was just refreshing to kind of get back. But I needed to get back to southern Utah. I needed to make a decision. I was starting to get the feeling that it was time to stop, time to rethink what I was doing, because trying to do the nomad thing in an older RV during a pandemic was challenging. It was really stressful. So I got back to Utah, and I ended up moving in with a friend for 6 weeks. Semi-cleaning out the RV, and I winterized it, and at the end of that 6 weeks I decided to do one more attempt at traveling, and so I went down to southern Utah. It was starting to turn into winter in northern central Utah, so I decided to go back south where I knew I would be able to de-winterize the RV. So I got down to Cedar City, and I always like stopping at Cedar City. It's a little area that I know where to go park. My gym is there. It just totally relaxed. And when I got down to St. George, I was there for all of a day when my scooter died. I had had my scooter serviced before leaving too. Spent $350 to have it really fully serviced, right? Took the scooter off and was driving it around the block. I was literally just a couple blocks from the RV when the engine just seized up and died. It just seized up and died. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was totally running perfectly, and the next second I was going through an intersection and it died. So I had to push it a couple blocks back to the RV, pushed it back up onto the hitch, and I thought, well, I could go all the way back up to central Utah where I just came from, or I can go to Las Vegas. Las Vegas had several scooter shops, one that I've used a couple of times, and there was another one that I had seen but I had not used, and I ended up using that one. So I drove a couple hours to Las Vegas, took it there in the morning, and they diagnosed it and were able to fix it that day. The spark plug had apparently exploded out of its socket and destroyed the engine head. But it was like a common piece, because that scooter, those cheap Chinese scooters, they all use this common template. They all use this engine that has common parts. I could have gotten the part for like $30 on Amazon. But they were able to get it fixed, and it cost about $180 to get the scooter back up and running. And it was running, and I stayed in Las Vegas for 3 or 4 days, and I was able to go around. And I decided, because a lot of things in Las Vegas were still closed, I could go to the gym, but they didn't let you use the showers there. Unlike Idaho and Utah, where they did. And coffee shops were closed, and so I was stir crazy inside. There wasn't a lot to go do, so I hightailed it back to St. George, took my scooter off, ran it for a day, and the next morning I took it out and the front suspension system broke and collapsed. So my lesson learned about cheap Chinese scooters is just as I hit the 10,000 mile mark, it just up and fully died. So at that point, I was really feeling the stress of the situation, of everything going on in the world, being in the RV, all the stress points of dealing with it during a pandemic when my normal outlets are generally gone. There were two coffee shops in independent places that I could go to in St. George at least. My options were that I could have gone, again, all the way back to Las Vegas and bought a new scooter for about $1,500. So I considered that. I considered it. I could have gone back there and done that. The other option would be to drive back up to central Utah and just pack it up. And that's what I decided to do. The stress of the year was beginning to affect me physically. And I decided that buying another scooter and continuing down the path that I was going, given the state of the world, was not the best choice at that point. So to make a very long story short, I came all the way back up to Utah, central Utah, parked the RV on a friend's property, and fortunately my car is here. I started doing apartment hunting and pretty quickly found an apartment up in Ogden, and so I have moved up to Ogden, Utah, which turns out is a pretty cool little town. And I sold the RV. Sold it a few weeks ago, actually. So it felt like the right thing to do. That particular vehicle had done its bit for King and Country for me, and I learned a lot from it, but it was time to go. I did not want to push my luck with an RV from the mid-'80s. It held up really well. Chevy manufactured a very robust vehicle, and so I did not have major mechanical problems with it. But my threshold for stress was such that I could not have handled if something had happened that I would have had to deal with. So for now, I'm in an apartment and I'm mulling over my ideas of what to do. But one of the things that I've wanted to do is talk about myself, not just what happened and how things played out over the past couple of months. But I want to talk about myself emotionally in a way that I have never done before. One of the big challenges for me doing what I did for 3 years in the RV was try and overcome some emotional challenges to doing what I had done. And I think I have a very unique backstory that I never really talked about, that I kind of want to come clean about and really dive in and talk about it, and record a video and just let people know where I was coming from, because it has a big impact on what I ended up doing, in the RV for that period of time. So I'm going to do another video about that where I'm really going to dive deep in and reveal some stuff about myself that I think is a very interesting set of backstory components. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I do hope you watch that, and I'll talk to you later.